Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming along and listening to me for about 30 minutes, if I can get through the slides in time, that is. My name is Simon Ayers. I'm the Chief Exec at TrustMark. TrustMark is the government-endorsed quality scheme. We used to be the standard scheme. We are now the actual overall quality scheme, and we have a role to play in retrofit. But what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit around some opportunities, some challenges that we have, but also actually around some of the skills areas as well, because we talk a lot about the problems with retrofit. We don't really talk about some of those solutions and some of the things we have to get right as we move forward. TrustMark currently has 41 scheme providers, so they would be organisations like NIC, IC, NAPIT. They are organisations, Elmhurst for instance, where you will register within the retrofit environment. We have 14,700 businesses and we have around 51,000 tradespeople working within that sector. And they cover a vast amount of work. And you're probably saying, well, we're in a retrofit show. Why are we actually looking at the areas of work that are covered? When you have your house retrofitted, and I mean deep retrofitted, you then have all sorts of other aspects. You have the desire to paint and decorate your house. You have the desire to put a new kitchen in, a new bathroom suite. You have major electrical works done. So we mustn't forget that retrofit is generating a far wider demand than just retrofit itself. So all these different trades all have to come together to deliver retrofit in its entirety. And when you start looking at all the areas that have to come together, you start realizing it's really a very nice conundrum to bring together challenges when you have all these interventions in a property. So you start thinking about maybe the disputes that might come between the businesses, the consumer, the challenges that come with protecting a consumer. You know, in the days have gone where we were just changing a gas boiler for a few £1,000s, you're now talking about a retrofit being 10, 20, 30,000 pounds. So it has to be different. It has to be a different aspect to when we move forward. TrustMark works on a license basis. So we have master licenses and sub-licenses that go all the way down through right to the tradesperson. And that tradesperson must prove their competence, and they must work within a code of conduct and a charter. That code of conduct requires them to ensure that the consumer is financially protected, that they are working within the current standards and they are delivering quality outcomes. And the quality outcomes is really important. Where we fit into this is probably about picking up all those different elements. So yes, we have access to vetted, registered businesses. Those businesses have to demonstrate a number of different factors. They're also, through that process, it's not picking up, right. Sorry, let me try that. Is that better? Right. So let me just get my head back in. Right, sorry about that, that's fine. So what we have is, within our requirement for our framework, we have a set of standards that have to be met. Those standards have to be audited. Those standards have to ensure that there is a quality output from the business, so that the consumer is in a place where they need to be. We are the custodian of something called PAS 2035, the standard for retrofit. The PAS, widely used in government-funded schemes, so capital and grant-funded schemes, is challenging in the able-to-pay sector, because lots of people are trying to work out how it fits and where it slots into that process. And one of the key aspects is actually now making sure that when you're investing in your property, you are protected. So there is a financial protection in place should something go wrong. And that's become more challenging because actually the amounts of investment now have grown considerably. So it's now, if you think about something around the insulation, external wall insulation with a 25-year warranty, there aren't many insurers that will provide a 25-year warranty. So that's becoming more challenging as we move forward. So let's move to the real challenge. This is a current EPC breakdown. So I think it's about 6 to 8 weeks old. We took this off the government website, we put it into pretty colours, but if you start looking at what you see up there, we have 60% of all our UK property in an EPC D or less category. All right. If you look at what we're trying to achieve for net zero, if you wanted to be perfect and get into an A category, yeah, look at the percentage. It's not a great move, is it? And add to that, where you have articles coming out in daily papers that start questioning the value of an EPC. How good is the EPC in actually really starting the process for retrofit? We estimate that there are 24 million homes that will have to be retrofitted in the next 27 years. All right. So starting today, I think the number there is, 2,450 roughly. Well, that was done a few days ago, so it's now more. Every day, 7 days a week, for the next 27 years to achieve net zero. If we then start thinking, well, actually, it's not going to be EPC high B or A's, but we're in EPC C's, which a lot of organisations are now aiming for, you have another challenge. So you've got almost a two-stage challenge to take something to almost being low carbon ready there with the installation, ready for that low carbon install. It's an interesting time to be in the marketplace. But what it does start to show you is how much investment has to take place. There's been all sorts of stories in the papers, but anything between 500 billion to over £1 trillion worth of investment to take our housing stock to where it needs to be. Okay. And then you start thinking, well, where's that all going to come from? And I'll show you a couple of slides. This first one. So we hear lots about the government, where they're investing, how they're investing. And excuse the acronyms there, ECO4, Energy Company Obligation. Should have been up and running. It's probably running about 12 months late at the moment. So there's got to be best part of £4 billion spent in the next 3 years delivering ECO4. ECO4 is a multi-measure whole house approach to the Energy Company Obligation. So that on its own is vast. But there are challenges within that in terms of looking at how you get the eligibility, and how you move forward with it. And then we have something else. Not so long ago you would have heard the announcement for something called the Energy Company Obligation Plus, which is looking at some single measures, so cavity wall insulation, loft insulation, but also heating controls. That's worth, as you will see there, £1 billion over the next 3 years. Possible rumours that that will be extended through to 2030 at £1 billion a year. So if you start adding these together, you then put home upgrade grant, off-grid, multi-measure, whole house approach, 800 million. Social housing decarbonisation, wave 2.1, further waves to come. So actually, there's a lot of money to play for. An awful lot of money to play for. Process-wise, it's not always that easy to get it. So I think we have some lessons to be learned, and what we're doing with the sectors and with government is looking at how we can speed that process up, what that looks like, how we can move forward. You have a warm homes discount sat at the bottom, and then you also have the boiler upgrade scheme. So interestingly, when you talk about government capital, government investment, they are looking here at their 7 to 9 billion that they said they would put. And I think Lord Callanan said a while ago, about 3 weeks ago, they expect at least another 6 to 8 billion to be available following this. So there's a longer term pipeline being created. But if we look at the able to pay sector, what we've talked about at the moment is social housing, fuel poverty, and in that social housing sector, it accounts for about, I think, 3.8 million of the homes that we have, out of that 28.3. Remainder start to fall into the private rental sector, and they fall into the able to pay markets. Private rental sector, over 5 million homes, and if you remember, there was consultation on a move to get all new tenancies in private rental property to an EPCC by April 2025. And then by 28 for everything in the private rental sector to be EPCC. In 2 years, really, it's not going to happen. The bill hasn't been published, and I think we have lots of things around that, including, dare I say, things, general elections, votes, and everything else coming. So there is movement. People are starting to look at what that looks like. You also have, I guess, really now the lenders and the financiers starting to look at this market. And why are they looking at the market? The picture in front of you is taking a grey property to a green property. All the lenders that are working across Europe, including most of our lenders in the UK, have something called, a target to convert their mortgage books to green mortgage books. It's called the NZBA requirement. That means that they have to start delivering and working with consumers, with really the whole market sector to move property from this grey to this green. It creates its own challenge because you end up with property falling into a grey sector which becomes a stranded asset. So you start splitting a market. So it's really quite finely balanced. But we're already seeing two of the big lenders now saying anything, when you retrofit a property, you go through, you have really gone through the whole process, insulation, low carbon, EV charging, you can see anything to a 5 to 10% increase in asset value. So you start to justify now a spend. If you're in a £200,000 house and you see a 10% increase in your asset, you could argue you're starting to release a value to undertake a retrofit that might take you £20,000. So you're starting to balance a cost basis here, a cost neutral basis. The other thing being is that they are now also looking at green mortgages. So with the mortgage rates where they are, if you can apply and get a green mortgage and see a 1 or 2% reduction in your mortgage rate, you then start thinking, well, I've got a lower mortgage rate, lower mortgage payment, I've insulated, I've put low carbon heating measures into my home, I've got very little heating costs, there's a benefit to be won. So the argument for retrofit starts to build. The challenge we have, though, in the able to pay sector especially, is they need to trust us. They need to build confidence that as a sector we can deliver the right retrofit to the right property. Consumers have to have the confidence that I'm investing this money and that I can take this forward. And I think they're playing in the markets at the moment. So we are working with a number of the lenders. You'll see some there. Barclays, Halifax, Coventry are all offering cashback facilities. So Barclays at the moment, if you're a Barclays mortgage holder, you have a heat pump installed, you can apply for the bus scheme for £5,000 and get an additional £2,000 cashback from Barclays. So they are starting to try to ramp up that market. They're also, though, offering right the way through down to things like replacement of glazing. There is cashback for all these different functions. They're all starting to test the market. And the reason they're testing it is they want to invest. One of those companies on that, and I'm not going to say which one, has openly said they have £13 billion a year that they want to invest in the home improvement and energy efficiency market. But they can't at the moment. They are nervous, They want to find those openings. They want to find the trust. The EPC issue that I spoke about earlier, most of them are basing lending against EPCs. If you can't trust an EPC, that leaves them exposed. So we have to build all these things together to start to make it more viable for them to come into the market. The other interesting piece that I think anyone that's in the retrofit market is guilty of is we tend to think it's easy. We tend to think that actually it's a retrofit. We talk about it like it's a breeze. Consumers still don't understand retrofit. If you talk to most consumers, they are at a point where it's a great idea and I like to save money, but when you start talking to them about how a house the interventions in a property will take place, the disruption that takes place, it becomes a tougher challenge. The investment that they have to make becomes a tougher challenge. the fact that we are now seeing lots of the lenders and lots of the market building almost digital twins, so you can play with your house, you can do all sorts of things with your house, you can plug into different elements, and you can build what you would like your house to look at, which then leads straight to the point where you can find appropriate lending, including now those things like bathrooms, kitchens, because actually if you're destroying a house to the degree of taking all the floors out, which you would have to in mine, I'd probably want to replace lots of those other elements. So there's a real drive now, to start thinking wider than just the retrofit, and what this whole interaction with the consumer looks like. But let me give you a sample of the market. So a few weeks ago, we were told that the current UK housing market asset value is £7 trillion. Of that 7 trillion, 1.5 trillion is tied up in mortgages and other property loans, which leaves a £5.5 trillion asset that we are sat on. If we went back to our major retrofit and said it was going to cost £1 trillion, if you think about it, we have enough asset value to release, if we can find the right mechanisms, to deal with retrofitting the 24 million and actually push on to net zero. But we have to find those processes. We've got to find that way to release that money. We have to find the way to make it appealing to a consumer as we go through. In 12 months, and this came from a Hampshire-based survey, 80% of householders now started thinking about their energy consumption, the use that they were going through. And we have seen increases in numbers that we engage with, of consumers now asking the question. Solar PV, any of you involved in that market at the moment will recognise it's absolutely flying. They can't get enough solar panels at the moment. It is really, really busy. Heat pumps are busy, insulation is busy. Yet we still have a market that complains about skills shortages, complains about the accessibility. We still have, in some areas, poor compliance. So actually we need to balance this. We get the sector to improve, we bring that confidence to a consumer, and we have something which opens and unlocks an amazing market, an amazing opportunity as we move forward. But let's talk a little bit about risks. Consumer confidence to engage in non-funded areas. So this is, how do you convince Simon Ayers, who's due to retire in a couple of years, to spend £50,000 on his house when I'm going to sell it in 5 years' time? So there's, what would drive me to do that? The right reason, the right thing to do, environmentally, but then actually you've got to find the right funding mechanism that will link back to the property, will link to any investment to allow that to happen. We have this whole piece by the lenders. They require a de-risking, a comfort factor to put that money into the market. And we can do that. We just have to find a number of these factors and bring them together. And one of the ones that they're really worried about is the next one, which is competence and quality. You would have heard people probably around the retrofit arena talking around anything up to 400 to 500,000 tradespeople short to deliver 2030. And I'll show some slides on that in a second. Mobilisation, what will bring people into this market? What will bring them on? Material shortages. If you think about it, in the last 18 months, they're all real things that have happened, but we now keep replaying them as the problem. We're not looking for that solution. We're not saying, well, actually, let's get ready for this. Let's move forward for this. The compliance challenge is an interesting one. And I talked about it earlier, where when you start taking a property and you are then interfering with that property across glazing, EVs, roof, through solar PV, heat pumps, you're really taking a house and creating a chance for an awful lot of things to go wrong. So we need to ensure we have a competent workforce. We need to ensure that that workforce understands those interactions. So PAS 2035, love it or loathe it, is actually a really good way of bringing all those things together to make sure that we have the right design, so the right assessment, the right design, and then we can move forward to make sure the right installer is doing the right thing. Design, massively important. I know there was a presentation previously. The assessor market, is a key part of this, a very key part. I think, personally, that maybe needs to be slightly different. We then build in things around EV charging and EVs themselves. So I have an EV, wanted to put a second EV on, my wife wanted one. We can't do it, because our system in our house won't allow us to do it. So I've got solar PV and done all the right thing, but now I've just walked into a complete block. So we have to overcome these challenges to make it easy for a consumer to do this. There is a good news story though. So when we start talking about compliance and we talk about where we are seeing improvements, where we are seeing outcomes really get to a point that we have more confidence, you'll see this since 2021. This is the improvement in first-time compliance that we are seeing, and we audit thousands and thousands of jobs a year. And the great thing is that we've seen it go up, and we have now got to a point where we can do risk-based auditing. So no longer are we just targeting general properties to go and look at. We are now focusing on specific properties in specific areas with specific actions. So it's really important that we move that through. And all of that data is stored on something we call the data warehouse. So any work through social housing, through capital schemes, grant funding schemes, has to go through a TrustMark registered business, and it has to be lodged in the data warehouse. So we now have records of who did what, where, when, how, and how it's protected. And that's where the lenders are going as well. The lenders now want that comfort factor, so if anything ever goes wrong, there is a place that they can go to so that they can track back, we can look at remedial works, we can look at who did the work, and we can follow that through. That's supported by the supply chain, by the consumer protection model. Consumer protection, massively important, but any of you in this market will know it's quite challenging. And as I mentioned earlier, the challenge of putting a 25-year insurance policy on a cavity wall or on a solid wall. You have 2 years on some products, you have 5 years on others, 10 years on those. But you have to go through a process before you can get anywhere near that insurance protection. So we now have built a system with an ombudsman in so that when you go through this process, a consumer can follow it in a logical process, they can go back to the business, they can go to a scheme, and then they can follow that through online mediation, right through to an ombudsman. So there is another level that we are starting to provide. And as we really move forward, we come to a last few slides about the supply chain. So these numbers, to me, are quite shocking. So we are 217,000 new workers short in the construction sector today, without retrofit. We need approximately 270,000 new tradespeople, within the retrofit sector. A fifth of the construction workforce, as it says there, is aged over 55. And the last one, 810,000, are likely to be retiring and need replacing by 2030. So if you look at the gap in total, it's a 1.3 million gap between now and 2030. So we need to start worrying about bringing people in and building new businesses, supporting new businesses today, not waiting for it to happen in years to come. And when we talk about new businesses, there are some interesting stats on this one. Between October and December last year, there were 471,000 18 to 24-year-olds out of work. And yet we can't find apprenticeships, we can't find people to go into apprenticeships. We've maybe got a bit of a mismatch here somewhere. You start looking at sort of the 16%, not in employment or education. So that's of the workforce, of the labour force. More worryingly to me was the 9% who will believe they will never, ever work. So we've got a bit of a messaging piece here and a bit of a cultural piece to take place. We need to look how we support people through that process. And some of those things that we now have to start thinking about, and not replaying just the message, is how we move forward. So 305,000 apprentices over the next 8 years. You're probably aware there are just over 1 million micro and small businesses operating in the construction and energy sector. If every one of those businesses took on an apprentice out of those 472,000, you would very quickly have solved our skill shortage. So we have to be a bit, sort of inventive, I can't even say it, about how we move forward and what we do, and how you support people, because it is quite challenging. There are other areas there, you'll see at the bottom there, that at the moment we don't have apprenticeship requirements for some of the installation areas. So we need to think about how we fill these. We spoke to one of our local colleges in Hampshire and asked them whether they would set up a course, and they went, absolutely, we will do that for you. They said probably the earliest we could do it is 24, maybe 2025. We've got to go through so many bureaucratic processes to get to the point where we can move forward. So it is quite challenging. One of the things we are doing as TrustMark, so I said we like solutions, is we have teamed up with an organisation on the south coast that works in Hampshire and West Sussex. They will now place 18 to 24-year-olds in work experience for a few weeks. If it works well, they can then convert that work experience place straight into an apprenticeship. So for a small business or for a micro business, it means that you can actually almost, try before you buy, but you can take somebody on, make sure there's a fit, make sure there's an interaction, and move them into that. And then they support you through that apprenticeship process. If we can create something like this and then deliver it across all the areas, working with the sector as a whole, then it's really, really great for the sector, it's really great for consumers, and we start to plug the holes we have. And that's my 30 minutes, almost dead on. Any questions from anybody at all? I've got to wait very lightly then until my next thing. Happy to talk to anybody as ever. Oh, question in the back.
Yeah. Hello. You mentioned the TrustMark data warehouse.
Yeah.
I was wondering, who is the responsible for uploading data at which stage of the retrofit? Is it the installers? Is it the retrofit coordinator? Or could it be done in early stages just to reflect design, retrofit design, before it's installed?
So it's changing now. So at the moment, the priority is set with the retrofit coordinator. So they would normally lodge the project, and then they would lodge the each measures. But we're also now, through a new hub that's being developed, going to allow pre-lodgement of a project, and that includes the design, so we can look at the design to make sure that's being sort of matched. But we also allow, through other schemes, we have to allow installers to also lodge. So basically, depending on the scheme, depends on what the lodgement process will be. But we're really flexible in making sure that that's open to people that need to lodge.
Thank you. And where can we access that if I want to take one project forward?
That would be through, so if you are a TrustMark registered RC, you go through your portal, claim your portal, and you go through, and it takes you straight into that lodgement process.
Thank you.
Well, it looks like I've got away very lightly, actually. One question. Lovely. Thank you very much for listening to me for 30 minutes. And as I say, happy to take any questions. And I hope you've just found that of interest, a different view of retrofit. Yeah, positive and negative. But actually, if you're thinking about setting up and moving into business in this area, what an opportunity we have. Massive opportunity. Thank you very much.